And a warm welcome back to CYP to everyone joining us online and in person. I would particularly like to welcome Councillor Bim and my Vice Chair, Councillor Flack, who are joining us in the chamber for the first time. And so you're both very welcome, and we look forward to your contributions this evening. We have quite a few important items to get through tonight. And so I try and keep my introduction not too long. And so we can go straight into the agenda. For tonight, we're going to be focusing on the Merton Safeguarding Children Partnership Annual Report. I've always said from the very beginning of my time as chair that our highest priority is protecting our children and young people from harm. And so I'm very much looking forward to hearing from the independent scrutineer, Sarah, and the young scrutineer, Halima, as well on this report. And thank you both for joining us online. Also on tonight's agenda, we'll be hearing from Julia Groom on the Child Healthy Weight Programme. I'm pleased that you can join us in person, especially given the tube strikes, which has made transport difficult for everyone. And I'm sure I speak for everyone in saying that we're looking forward to your presentation and to posing questions to you on this really important issue. And in addition to the usual CSF departmental updates and performance indicators we kindly get from officers, we'll be closing this evening with an update from Councillors Kirby, Hall and MacArthur on the independent task group work you've been carrying out on the important and really heartbreaking issue of child self-harm. And so thank you all, and to Cabinet Member Kenny, who never fails to attend the CYP meeting. We look forward to hearing from you also. Now, before I move on, I would like to update you on the proposal we agreed in principle at the last meeting, which was to introduce a youth voice in some form to Scrutiny. I was very much looking forward to presenting a report before you tonight on how we can move that proposal forward based on the feedback you gave me at the last meeting. But sadly, I'm disappointed to announce that there was an intervention at the 11th hour from the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny Commission. And so this has meant that I have to delay that report until I've had the chance to sit with Councillor Foley and the other scrutiny chairs to go through that proposal with them. But do rest assured that it is my intention to bring that report before the panel as soon as possible. And I will keep you posted on any developments on that. I'll be happy to take any questions on this towards the end of the meeting. But with that said, and I know that introduction wasn't as short as I promised, we'll jump straight into agenda item 1. Have there been any apologies for absence?
Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Michael Butcher, and Councillor Sherry-Ann Bim is attending as a substitute.
Brilliant. And as I said in my introduction, really warm welcome to you, Councillor Bim, and we're looking forward to your contributions. Also, Cabinet Member Fraser is unable to attend as well due to a diary clash. We'll move on to the next agenda item. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? No? Okay. Then we'll move on to the minutes from the previous meeting. Just a note on this before we agree on the minutes, if you do in fact agree. Councillor MacArthur, I know in the last meeting you asked for an update on the immunisation programme in the borough. I'm still liaising with officers on bringing that update to you in a future meeting. And so that action is still pending, and I will keep you posted on that. And with that said, do we agree on the minutes as a true and accurate reflection of that meeting? Brilliant. Okay, then we'll jump into the Merton Safeguarding Children Partnership annual report, which will be presented by the independent scrutineer, Sarah Lawrence, and also the young scrutineer, Elima Mahmood, who are joining us online. And before I hand over to them, I'd just like to say, as someone who, as you can tell from my introduction, is really passionate about engaging young people in the work of Scrutiny. I was really impressed reading Halima's biography and how she went from being a young inspector to now sitting on the Safeguarding Children Partnership board and providing a youth voice on the important issue of safeguarding children. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing from you both. And with that said, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce your report, and then we will move on to any questions that members have.
Thank you, Chair, and everybody. Nice to meet you all, even if it's virtually. My name's Sarah Lawrence. I'm the independent scrutineer for the partnership. I've been doing that role since 2020, and I'm eternally grateful for Halima's support in that role, because she provides, as you said, Chair, a really vital engagement opportunity with young people. And we partner really on this as independent scrutineers of young and old, we like to say. So just to let you know that I do this in an independent capacity. So I'm employed to deliver approximately 15 days a year, as is Halima around that time. I do other work around safeguarding. I'm affiliated to the National Safeguarding Practice Review Panel. I deliver other sorts of serious case reviews, including historic reviews in a religious organisation, and also I have worked with domestic and sexual abuse specialist services in the UK. So I've got a kind of range of safeguarding expertise and background. One of my biggest highlights in work is working in Merton, engaging with the children and young people that we can in the projects that we deliver. And also just because there's such a positive feeling around safeguarding partnership work in Merton. So I just wanted to sort of reinforce that with you. One of the biggest highlights of that is working with Halima and engaging with the children and young people that we do in our work. So I just thought I'd hand over to Halima so she can introduce herself before we start talking about the report.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. I am Halima. I am one of the young people from Merton, so I have lived experience of growing up and being a young person, going to school and like living my life in Merton, which is always nice to go from that to sort of the other side of looking at how Merton as a whole protects its young people. In terms of my background, I specialise in disability inclusive research. So my approaches to research methodologies are from the get-go very inclusive, very much aware of different ranges of capacities and abilities. And in that sense, our scrutiny work has always been as inclusive as possible and very much trying to access those voices that aren't traditionally accessed in traditional research. It's been an absolute pleasure being guided and taught by Sarah and supported by the Merton Children's Safeguarding Partnership. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Thanks, Halima. Just to let you know, Chair and members, that we have Maisie Davis also present, who is the Partnership Manager for the Safeguarding Children Partnership. And Maisie will probably chip in and add things that we might forget to add or answer some questions. Also, just to let you know, there is an independent person that works with the partnership. It's called Aileen Buckton. I'm not sure if you've been introduced to Aileen. Sadly, she's not available at the moment because she's not well, but she also offers another level of independence for the partnership, which is really important in safeguarding for an area like Merton or any area to have the independence. Independent scrutiny is a statutory duty of all partnerships, and so it's something that every borough and city and council has in some shape or form. It's up to each area to decide how they do that, and in Merton it's agreed through a published document that the independence is provided by the independent person Aileen, independent scrutineer myself, and the young scrutineer Halima. So just to let you know that that's how we do that. It's something that has to be delivered. We are also part of a wider system, which is the inspectorates that local services have. So there's Ofsted, for example, which you would have heard of course, and the police inspectorate and the CQC for health. So we are part of that in a local sort of way, but linked into that nationally, if you like. So our role acts as a constructive and critical friend to the partnership. The idea behind it, and definitely our motivation, it feels, is to be a critical friend and to help promote reflection, to help with improvement, because as I hope you realise with safeguarding, the job is never done. There's always gaps, there's always improvements to be made, no matter how good or outstanding you might be in your services. Sadly, there's always tragic cases and incidents and issues that come up that will always highlight gaps, and we'll always be trying to improve and fill those gaps to try and reduce the harm that can be caused. And that's what the partnership here definitely strives to do. And we feel that in the work that we do in our limited time. It's really clear that that's a positive approach of the partnership here. So some of the things we've worked on, which are sort of highlighted in the report, include thematic scrutiny. We deliver a plan every year where we focus on some topics and themes that are of a priority to the partnership, or they're new and emerging issues that come up nationally from case reviews. You would have heard of some of the horrendous cases in the news nationally that then sort of drive forward the agenda on a particular issue. So, for example, Halima and I are currently working on a topic which is adultification of children, and it predominantly focuses on the learning from a case in Hackney about child Q, which I'm sure you would have heard of, but if not, we can talk about that. And so we're looking to see what more could Merton do as a partnership to respond to an issue like the adultification of children, particularly Black young girls that are treated as adults when they're still children. So that's the idea behind adultification. We've also looked at sexual harassment and what more can we do in the partnership to support schools and colleges and children to respond to sexual harassment and sexual abuse that has been a big focus nationally. And one of the things we looked at post-COVID was the safety of babies under 1, given some high-profile cases around non-accidental injury. Some of this is reported in the report, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at that. We are required by statutory guidance to produce an annual report, which is what you've seen. Working Together 2018 is the sort of the document that we have to work to in safeguarding partnerships. And that states that we have to report annually on progress and priorities and what the needs are of children and young people in the borough. So that report is what you've received. And as you'll see, it's structured around the priority areas that the Safeguarding Partnership has in its business plan, which is reviewed regularly. And those are strong leadership and strong partnership, early help and neglect, domestic abuse and think family, and contextual safeguarding. So part of our role as well, it's statutory sort of duty and defined in the local partnership agreement, is to provide reflections and also scrutiny of the annual reports. We do that every year. We spend quite a lot of time together looking at the annual reports, and we talk to Maisie and the partners and reflect on our learning throughout the year and provide those reflections, which I hope you can see in there. One of the things that we also do is just look at the format, think about what we think should be presented in there. And so one of the things that we pushed back to ask the partnership to include was to talk about the impact of the work on children, because I think we all want to see what the actual impact is of something like a partnership. How does it feel to a child? What does it mean? What difference is it making, really? And so we're really pleased to see that that kind of was revised, and the impact was much more strengthened in the report. Okay, and I think really just to say overall our feeling, as reflected in our commentary there, based on the fact that this is 21 to 22. So it reflects on the period pre-April 22. So we're talking a few months ago. It takes a while for the reports to come together in this way, as I'm sure you know from other business and reports that you receive. So reflecting back on that time when both of us were in post, we felt that that was a period that really demonstrated the strength of Merton's partnership to safeguard children. There's lots in there that is demonstrated also in the Ofsted report of children's services. We feel there's a real strength to the partnership. You can feel that when we go out to talk to the children and young people, we talk to the practitioners, the schools and others, you feel the partnership knowledge around, which is really good. And we also feel the strength in the partnership at the strategic level, where we see every time we meet the cooperation and collaboration and openness of the partners with each other, which is always a really strong thing to be doing in safeguarding, because often gaps are created where the openness is missing and the honesty and the kind of joined up working. So it's really positive. In our scrutiny, children have told us what works well for them. So, for example, in our work around sexual harassment, we spoke to children of the age of, I think they were about year 10, mostly age sort of 15, what they felt was working well around sexual harassment and what wasn't. One of the things they told us is that they always feel like they've got someone they can trust at school to talk to. But then they also reflected on negative aspects of trust, that they felt there were other statutory services they couldn't trust. And the children that we spoke to definitely felt that national events and big high profile cases had affected that trust level. Halima, I don't know if you want to add anything here.
I completely agree with everything you've said. That's definitely the view that I have and my interpretation of the outcomes of that particular piece of scrutiny. I would definitely reiterate the fact that within the partnership as a whole, there's definitely a high degree of reflexivity and openness to learning and accepting what it is the young people are saying. It's definitely reflected in the way that the partners work together and the partnership works as a whole. As well as that, I would say that the young people definitely do feel like they are able to have a say as well and are enabled through this scrutiny function to have that access in making those changes and enacting what it is that they want to see going forward.
Thanks, Halima. So yeah, just to say, while we feel it's really positive, we're definitely identifying areas for improvement. And every time we do scrutiny, we present that back to the partnership and we talk about recommendations that we make, and then that goes on to be delivered as an action plan for something that the partners can take forward. So I think that's all I need to say. Is there anything anyone, Maisie or Halima, would like to add? No, that's good. So back to you, Chair, I suppose, to see if there's any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. And also, I don't know about members in the room, but I found reading that report incredibly useful. It was a well put together report. And just some quick learnings I took from reading that report is just being able to see how good the partnership is at taking tragic cases and drawing the key learnings from those cases and then implementing them, whether that's in the form of more training or more multi-agency collaboration. And then so it was a really well put together report. Now I'm going to hand over to members for any questions. I'll start off by checking whether there's anyone online who would like to ask a question before I move to members in the room. No? Okay. Any members in the room that have any questions? We'll start off with Councillor Howard and then Councillor Kirby. Do we have one more question? I will ask the third question because I like to do questions in threes. Councillor Howard.
Okay, yes, good evening, and thank you for the report. I was just wondering, what are we coming across any occurrences of young girls being subjected to FGM? This is a big topic now, and it's quite horrendous what takes place. Young girls being either subjected to FGM in this country or disappearing from schools and coming back a couple of months later to declare what's happened to them. And I'm wondering, does this fall under the remit here?
Thanks.
So before you answer, can I take all three questions and then I'll hand over to you, Councillor Kirby?
First of all, just to say, I thought it was a really good report. Halima, actually, my question is for. I'm very interested in your engagement with young people, and I'd like a bit more about how you conduct that.
And if I can add to that question, because my first question was also around that area, but not just how you engage with young people and get their input, which was laid out quite well in the report in terms of how you presented the Merton Young Residents Survey and the other work you've done to engage young people. But what I would like to know is, what does that feedback loop look like? Because it's one thing getting input from young people and then communicating that input to the partnership, but then following that step, and once you get feedback from the partnership, is that then communicated back to the young people? Because one thing that was identified in the report, especially with the Section 11 audit, is it highlighted that there's a need for to improve, the culture of listening and sort of taking into account the wishes and feelings of young people in safeguarding matters. And so it'd be good to get a bit more detailed feedback on how you then continue to engage with those young people once they've given you your feedback and you've passed that on to the partnership. And with that, I will hand over back to you guys.
Thank you. They're really good questions. In terms of FGM, female, shall I take that? I'll take that question. We'll take them in order, shall we? That's probably the best way. FGM, female genital mutilation, that definitely comes under the umbrella of the Safeguarding Partnership as an issue, because it's a safeguarding issue. There is a mandatory reporting duty for practitioners. So that is something that comes in as a, in terms of safeguarding referrals and information. What I don't know at this stage is the level of reporting that there is in Merton. I don't know if Maisie is aware of that, or if we could come back to members on the detail. Maisie, would you like to add anything?
I think in terms of numbers, probably need to come back to you on that. But certainly we do deliver FGM training as well as part of the MSc partnership every year. So that's something that we put on as regular training for multi-agency practitioners.
And a key thing is prevention, clearly, because the event itself is the issue, and the prevention of that is the main safeguarding concern. So yes, it is definitely part of the partnerships work and focus. Okay, Halima, do you want to take the next question, and then I'll help you if you need me to?
Yeah, of course. So the second question was, how do I conduct that engagement with young people? Sarah, Lawrence and I work together in our focus groups, and we come up with the focus group questions and focus group guide together in collaboration. We often do this by figuring out what exactly the asks are and what the answers are that we're trying to come up with or enable. And in doing so, often we have to look at the question and assess the complexity that comes with it and whether young children are able to understand that at their own capacity and level of capacity. So it takes quite a few iterations to sort of fine tune. We have previously conducted focus groups in one central location and invited children from schools to come and sit together in a room and open up those discussions, have that safe place to be able to talk about the topics that we're talking about. Going forward, we're probably going to trial a few different ways of doing this, because we acknowledge that not everyone can come to one central location. In terms of children with additional needs and disabled children, we were really fortunate to go to Perseid and speak to the children at that particular school, which obviously required quite a significant level of adaptation to the focus group guide that we had. to account for the capacity levels of the participants in this case, which was an incredible experience. It really, really put my skills as an inclusive researcher to, not to the test, but like incorporating what I'd learned, which was fantastic. So that's kind of how it looks. At the time of doing this particular piece of work, I was also employed as a young inspector, which gave me a lot more access to young people's views and children's views in Merton. I have now stepped away from that role, but I am in contact with the young inspectors that are still at Merton. So there is a lot of overlap in the work that we do, and it's a case of communicating with each other to ensure that we're really, really touching the pulse of what it is that children in Merton want, what they want to see happen. As to that particular question around the feedback loop, I'm going to start answering that here as well, because I think it's a nice little summary and summing up this particular aspect of the work. Absolutely, Section 11 identified a need to improve that culture of listening to the views of children and young people in Merton. I would say that that feedback loop is currently in the process of being refined. Our approach is to really push for easy read, accessible outcomes that can be passed around to wherever they need to be. Obviously, they're all centrally accessible through the Safeguarding Partnership website, and people are signposted to where these things are. But on top of that, we really do take on board what it is the children are asking us to do and what they need to feel safe. So if I take an example of one of the focus groups that we conducted at PSAID, it was clear that there needed to be a little bit more visibility in statutory services, and that was one of the changes that was implemented or in the process of being implemented as a result of that particular ask, and the need of those children to be able to recognise particular people around and about in the community that could be trusted in the safeguarding sense. So in that sense, that feedback loop very much exists, and I would really re-emphasise the fact that the MSCP is very, very, very good at listening to those particular asks and really does take those asks on board. Sarah, if you want to add anything to that, feel free.
No, just to say any suggestions anyone's got are always welcome, because we are constantly evolving what we're doing. It's kind of a learning piece of work every time we do it. We are really conscious of the need for feedback, and so we're looking at options about how we can do that in a way that can reach as many young people and children as possible in the right format as well. So we're looking at the sort of easy read kind of versions of things, and what's going to be digestible and easy to pass around or find out about for the wider group of children, not just the children that come to our focus group. So yeah, that's kind of where we're going with it, really. I'm really, really conscious and passionate about making sure that things are accessible to everyone, not, you know, exclusively for sort of certain groups or people that participate, really. And that also goes for practitioners as well, and parents, because we are obviously trying to reach all of our key people, not just the strategic people, but also the people on the ground and volunteers and people from communities and parents, as well as children. So yeah, that's what we're striving to achieve, and we're on a, I hate to use the cliche term, but we're kind of on a journey with that, which we're trying to find the right ways of doing that, and we're experimenting and kind of seeking feedback on how we do that too.
Thank you very much for those thorough answers. I also know from the report that it says that the MSCP is looking into ways it can better engage young people in the day-to-day work of safeguarding children. And that update on progress in that work will be coming in a following report as well. And so I'm looking forward to that. We'll take the next round of questions from Councillor Kirby, Councillor Fleck, and then Councillor Charles.
Hi, I just wanted to go back to the issue about how do you conduct your research, and I'm glad to hear that you are, you know, looking for ways of sort of broadening that, because I think the schools could have certainly quite a bit of impact. One of the things I remember doing in our school was to have a kind of ballot box where children could post concerns that they have, But I think in order for you to do that, there's got to be something, some discussion in the school that triggers that conversation, so that then children know that they can post information, and then you might get a broader range of issues coming through, because I think focus groups, as you say, it is limited. And the kids that put their name forward for that may not necessarily be the children that you're concerned about. I just wondered whether that might be quite a helpful thing to do.
I apologise if this doesn't come strictly under sort of this remit, but I just wonder what works be done to sort of protect children against or with each other, either with bullying or obviously county lines often affects. I'm being a bit too close to that. But I was just wondering, what work you've done to protect children against other children.
Okay.
Just one more question.
Yes, thank you for your report. It was really interesting. I was just really going to ask, you're saying that the instances of domestic abuse have risen over the last 3 years, and that's put down to COVID. So now all the lockdowns are over, but I was wondering if the cost of living crisis is having an impact as well that you've noticed.
Okay, and over to you, Sarah and Halima.
Okay, well, I can start the first question with an answer about the ballot boxes, actually, because when we did the consultation that we did, it was really clear that some schools were really open and using this kind of anonymous reporting and opportunities for children to come forward and tell them about experiences of abuse or, just safeguarding questions. And particularly around harassment, they were offering opportunities for children to talk to them anonymously, or not the opposite of anonymously, to report things. So that was really good. But what we would say is that wasn't across the board, and there was quite a reluctance at times for schools to consider that, because they were worried about how they would respond to anonymous reporting, given that you're not always clear who the victim and or perpetrator are, and therefore it limits their ability to investigate. So that's one of the concerns that comes up for schools, just so you're aware. But yes, we were recommending that schools and other partnership kind of services look at ways they can that children can come forward and talk about their experiences of harassment and abuse in a more open way. And so we were able to share the good practice that we'd seen in some schools with others. And in fact, when we presented to the partnership, one of the sixth form colleges came along with their students. I say came along but it was online. But one of the really positive parts of this work had been that sharing of the knowledge, because they'd actually done some really proactive work that was led and co-created by the students. And that was all about raising awareness of sexual harassment and abuse, and where to go and how to seek help, and what is okay and not okay, and challenging the kind of cultural norms around misogyny and other things. So just to let you know, yes, we did come across those things, and yes, we do share the opportunities that people demonstrate as good practice to others. And I think that partners, because when we have the big partnership meetings, there's sort of 40, 50 sometimes partners in the room or online, and there's a kind of opportunity for schools and others to learn from each other. So we were really hopeful that our scrutiny would help to ensure that happens regularly as well around safeguarding. Halima, do you want to add anything else to that?
I do, yes. So with regards to that particular question around ballot boxes and having that sort of anonymous level of reporting, Sarah has already touched upon the issues that comes along in terms of being able to take action on particular issues that do arise. One of the key findings that we did find from the children was that they really appreciate having a range of ways in which to be able to come forward to talk about things. So having the option to come forward and speak anonymously, having the option to speak to someone different to the designated safeguarding officer, who would then be able to feed back to the DSO, being able to say, yes, there are a range of adults in my life that I can go to report particular issues or speak about things in a certain way. something that children in Merton very much value. Some schools definitely do have this in place. Some schools are taking steps to put that in place. It's definitely something that is sort of emerging in that sense. But one of the key messages was that children really value having that range of options.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, and then next question around children that perpetrate abuse to other children. I think that was kind of what we were talking about, and all the range of types of abuse that can happen in that situation and exploitation. The partnership does have a focus on that. There's a specific subgroup that looks at the protection of young people in contextual safeguarding, which is what the name is for the safeguarding issues that arise outside of family situations. And we're talking there about child sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, gangs, and county lines. And so the partnership has a real operational and strategic focus on ensuring that the work is done around that the assessments are correct. And in fact, we've worked in Merton with some of the national leaders in these areas and developed things like assessments and training and toolkits for practitioners and engagement with children and young people based on the best practice that's out there. So I would say Merton is on the top of that curve in responding to those issues. So I hope that helps with your question. In terms of Halima and I, we haven't.
Sorry to interrupt, Sarah, but just on that very question, I just wanted to add a follow-up question to what you've just said, because when I was reading the report, I read that you did a thematic scrutiny sort of deep dive onto sort of sexual harassment in schools in Merton over the last year. And as far as I'm aware, that the findings from that report, the official findings, haven't been published, but I'm sure members will be interested to hear a bit about what you and Halima consider to be some of the key learnings from your scrutiny work, and sort of what recommendations need to go to schools, because the school where I'm a governor, and it's a primary school, sexual harassment in schools is becoming an issue, and that they've had to develop a policy on that, and rightly so. But it's an area of growing concern, and as scrutineers who have looked into it, it'll be good to get your views on what you felt your key learnings were from that, and any recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, well, there were lots of recommendations, hopefully not too many, but what I think might be best for this is for us to arrange for you to be sent the presentation, or for us to follow that up with you, because I feel like we couldn't, without going through the entire presentation, probably do justice to what we did identify. It was a very thorough piece of work, and I would like to be able to show you the whole picture of that, but just in a couple of minutes, really, just to sort of pick up on some of the points you raised there. One of the things we did identify as learning was that we should be looking at sexual harassment from the youngest age possible, and not just leaving it to secondary school and sixth form, because we felt like actually secondary and sixth form were pretty organised, to be honest, in terms of their responses. Like I've said about all safeguarding, there's always gaps. You can never sit back and think this is done. But in terms of secondary schools and sixth forms, it felt very much more progressive, and engaging with the children. There were lots of new projects and developments around trying to change the culture of what was going on. When we spoke to a primary school, which we did, which was brilliant, we were really pleased to talk to a primary school head. It became very clear to us that it needed to start earlier than secondary, and primary was an area, not just year 6 even, but even earlier. And then we even reflected on early years and how we could perhaps look at what's going on there. This is obviously, again, Merton being in the same situation as many others. And to be honest, there isn't a huge amount of work going on younger than secondary school. And so I think we just need to keep our eye on that. And again, it's like the learning loop thing we talked about, not just thinking we've done our scrutiny, we move on to the next topic. It's about repeating, kind of revisiting and ensuring that we're looking at the whole picture, not just the things that are out there. And talking to the primary head was so helpful, because it really did open our eyes about the younger ages. So I'm really grateful that you brought that up. And as I said, really willing to share more detail about what we found, because I think it would be really important for you to understand that. Halima, you look like
yes, please.
Yes.
add something.
I just want to contextualize this a little bit as well. So this particular piece of thematic scrutiny was in response to the 2020 Everyone's Invited campaign, which came out of allegations of sexual harassment, sexual violence happening in schools all across the UK. And obviously, if you haven't looked into it or haven't come across that, it was a massive movement predominantly led by and done for children and young people who had previously been victims of sexual violence and experienced sexual harassment at school whilst they were at school. And obviously I'd come back a few years later to reflect upon that and realize just where things went wrong. So that's why we went ahead with this particular scrutiny, which I think is kind of important in terms of thinking about where this came from. But on top of that, and I appreciate this is really just scratching the surface, there's so much that we found. But one of the key things that we did find was that we felt there was a real culture of recognizing that it could happen here, and it does happen here in Merton, and that the Safeguarding Children's Partnership was taking action to resolve or improve or enable children to be able to come forward. And there was a lot of positive change happening predominantly from schools, because this was obviously a very, very schools focused piece of scrutiny. If that just adds that little bit extra in.
Yes, and also just to reflect on the fact that it doesn't always happen in school. So I think one of the things schools struggle with is where events happen outside of school, but between students and maybe with students from other schools. And what was really interesting for us as well, I hope we've got time to talk about this, is that we spoke to schools from the different sectors, if you like. So we had the independent schools as well as the state schools, and we found quite a big difference in terms of the worries of those schools, but also in terms of the investment they were able to put in to respond to sexual harassment. So I think some of the schools in Merton have been highlighted in Everyone's Invited, and the ones that seem to have the budget for it, I suppose, in terms of their being privately funded, were able to buy in expertise and get trainers in and get external experts in, and really demonstrating the breadth of responses that could be made. And so what we try to do is to ensure that that is shared with the other schools in other parts of Merton that aren't so fortunate to be funded in that way. And that was really welcomed by all sectors. So that was really positive. But yeah, there was an issue there about perhaps children going to parties outside of school time, and how do they respond as a school. So there was some work to be done, and that's all progressing through the designated safeguarding leads network now, and it feels like we maybe have enabled a bit of further work in that area. So I'm hopeful that that's going to change things and help all schools kind of be on a level with their responses. But yes, I think there's probably more questions that will come out when you get a chance to have a look at our presentation, which we'd be happy to help with. And there was one final question, which was about domestic abuse. Thank you for that question. Yes, domestic abuse rising is a national concern. Merton is no different from other areas. COVID definitely had an impact because of the increase in family stresses. And one of the family stresses is financial stressors and stresses. And so this is not an excuse for domestic abuse, and it never would be. What it is that domestic abuse is already usually in existence, and the increase in family stresses exacerbates existing concerns and causes increase in risk. So then people come to the attention of services. So just to say, football is often cited as a reason why domestic abuse rises, financial crisis. I think the thing to remember is the risk is usually there, but it's not as high, and maybe the severity of abuse is exacerbated when there's stresses such as financial insecurity and worries. And clearly we're in a crisis where that is becoming more and more prominent. And so I think any area and nationally we can expect a rise in reported domestic abuse. And that is also coupled with awareness raising that's been happening. So during lockdown, you would have all heard of the rise in domestic abuse cases, the really serious and horrendous domestic homicides that occurred. They have been occurring for years, always, and the profile of them was raised in the media. So that increases people's confidence to report, which is great. So then you see an increase in numbers too. So I hope that helps with the answer to that question and isn't too long-winded. I think that was the questions, unless I've missed anything.
No, those were all the questions. So thank you for those answers. We'll now do one final round of questions, otherwise we might not end this meeting.
Sorry.
And a question from Councillor Bim, and I think an intervention from Elizabeth. Yes.
Just a quick question from me. Thank you so much for your time tonight, and I really found it interesting to review your report as someone who grew up in Merton, went to school in Merton especially. So my question is, you talked a lot about the focus groups that you've done. I was just wondering if there was any data collected about the ethnic makeup or any sort of data, equalities data, that's what I was looking for, in the focus groups that you surveyed at all?
Halima, you wanting to answer that question?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of demographics and equalities data, we tried to make it as broad as possible from the get-go, but we didn't want to define particular parameters, especially when it came to the sexual violence, sexual harassment scrutiny, because of the nature of this particular aspect and thematic scrutiny. I think what I would reflect upon, and what I don't want to go into too much detail about because of the granularity of the data and potentially identifying particular people, is that it was a diverse group of students, and we had engagement from more boys than girls, which perhaps is reflective of the steps that were being taken in terms of addressing this particular issue. But in terms of the diversity of the children engaged, I would say that it was fairly representative of the different groups across the borough.
We also offer, and we want to offer, targeted work. So that was why we have a specific focus on children with special educational needs and disabilities as well. So we are conscious that we always would need to seek those views in a slightly different way occasionally.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll have Elizabeth's intervention and then a final question from Billy. So Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wanting to maybe talk about a slightly different dimension of our understanding about how well our schools are doing in terms of keeping their children safe, and referring particularly, Councillor Flack, to your question about bullying. So Ofsted inspections have a particular focus on bullying. They have a particular focus on peer-on-peer abuse. And so schools that have been inspected under the current framework, and indeed the framework immediately prior to that, would have had those aspects particularly scrutinised. And that would have included pupil surveys, parent surveys, and really digging deep into what everybody was saying about what was happening. And the peer-on-peer, beg your pardon, peer-on-peer abuse, at more recent focus. But I think actually, again, to sort of reiterate what Sarah said, the work that the DSL Forum, our Designated Safeguarding Leads Forum, does in terms of sharing best practice is very, very important. And builds on some of the work, because there is a special group, a school leaders group, which comes together, which looks at behaviour and bullying, as well as a counsellors officer group, which looks at that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is appropriate, but is there any overread on the law enforcement on this? So, you know, is any stats or discussion held with the police in a nutshell? It's things like, I mean, I don't know, there might be a civil liberties issue here. As I'm asking this question, I'm thinking, if there's things like domestic abuse being reported and kids are in a school where the parents are subject to some kind of order, is that overread some way in terms of, or even at a higher level in terms of statistics? You know, like, for example, fights between schools, not always reported. You know, is there anything on that, Chair? to be, because there doesn't seem to be any crime statistics in here. Well, there isn't any crime statistic in here. And it just seems a little bit out there without any reference to what the nature of crime is in there. Does that make sense?
It does. Shall I come in?
Are you happy to take that, Sarah?
Yeah, I can start that. I mean,
All right.
maybe you might want to add in, or anyone else that's in the room that I'm not sure who's there, but in terms of Merton. But in the partnership, the police are one of the 3 partners, so they are integral. They're an equal partner to the local authority and health. So there's a sort of the tripartite partnership, and so the police provide that third of that. And in the partnership, there is a quality assurance group that looks at data, and that will include quite a lot of police data. The other thing is, on issues like domestic abuse, there's a shared kind of ownership strategically with the community safety partnership. So the leadership is there, and that will be reported on in the community safety partnership annual report. I can't remember what the formal name of that is, but that will be where that it sits. On an operational level, there's an operation called Operation Encompass, where schools receive information from the police about domestic abuse incidents. So just to reassure you that that is shared at that level. And then when it comes to things like our scrutiny on sexual harassment, when things happen outside of school and they're of a criminal nature, there was a lot of work to establish the levels. And that again is being done through the DSL network, about what should be reported to police and when. And that was something we highlighted in our reflections from the scrutiny, which is being followed up. So we are directly talking to the police strategic leads and operational leads about that. And they're also working with Elizabeth's team and the designated safeguarding leads and head teachers on those kind of issues. So there's definitely the really strong partnership working between police and education that we've seen. In terms of data, I don't know if Maisie wants to add anything about where that sits. I hope I've answered that, but Maisie, you may want to add something.
I would only add that we completely agree with Sarah that we do have performance reports that go to not only the quality assurance subgroup of the MSCP, but also the thematic subgroups, so early help and neglect, domestic abuse and family, and the PPYP, which is the contextual safeguarding subgroup. And as Sarah says, we do have various agencies contribute to that data set, and that is monitored regularly by each of those subgroups, and that includes that domestic abuse subgroup, which looks at referrals around domestic abuse and so on. And I don't know if anyone in the room wanted to add to that. My colleagues, like Sarah, I'm not sure who's there, but perhaps Dheeraj or Elizabeth. But that was all I was going to add. Thank you.
Can I just supplement that, Chair? That's useful that information is there, but it's not shared in the report. And I know from the local police in our own ward, we get the stats on break-ins, cars, and all the rest of it, but there's no kind of crime picture, if you like, in this particular area. So I wonder whether you think it would be useful to have something like that to give us a flavour when we get the report of what's happening in the area. And the other thing, the case, I mean, I can understand why this isn't in our local crime statistics, but we never get told about domestic abuse locally. Now, I can see why that would be a problem. Knowing if your neighbours are being subject to abuse or whatever, but we get all the information on the kind of, I wouldn't say low level, but we get all the information on the kind of mundane crime, i.e. cars, house break-ins, but we don't get, more concerning, all crimes concerning, but, things like domestic abuse, and we don't get any flavour. There's no flavour of that in the report. I get the fact that you're getting the stats and you're getting the data, but we're not as a body.
If I can jump in at this point, I understand what you mean, Councillor Hayes. When we do get those police updates, there is certain statistics that are not in that report. But that might be more of a question for people in this room than for Sarah and Halima. And so with that, I will hand over to the Director for Children's School and Families, Jane McSherry.
So the data, so I guess it sits in different forums. So the Violence Against Women and Girls Board does receive data on domestic abuse. It's not in this report because it sits under, because actually that data, the police data, the crime data comes to the Violence Against Women and Girls Board, and then that feeds into the Safer and Stronger Board, which is, and both of those are multi-agency partnerships because they're looking more broadly, whereas this is looking at children's safeguarding. So we'd be less looking at the crime statistics around domestic abuse than how we would be safeguarding children who may be in families where that's occurring. So the safeguarding board would be more looking at how do we safeguard those children than looking at the crime statistics. But the crime statistics are looked at within multi-agency groups within Merton. So as I said, the Violence Against Women and Girls Board looks at that because that met today and looked at those statistics, looked at the patterns that have happened over each quarter, and that also reports back into the Safer and Stronger Executive Board. So that's where those kind of crime statistics goes. And there's a read across in that there are people who are part of, so I chair the Violence Against Women and Girls Board and sit on the exec of the Safeguarding Partnership, but those crime statistics wouldn't be in our annual safeguarding report because actually they're reported under a different framework, and we would be more looking at how we're safeguarding those children than the sort of outcomes of the reports to police.
I take your point to report it elsewhere. But it seems to me that if there's domestic violence, the children are at risk, you know, and just think it would be a useful stat. So like you get the kind of demography. If there's violence, domestic violence in a house, and it's obviously a troubled house, and if you've got young children in that house, you know, they're subject to a double kind of torture if it's the mum and dad or the mum and the partner. I just my view, I'm not saying this is a line or whatever, seems to be useful read to know what's happening in domestic abuse in a report like this. It doesn't have to be detailed, just a flavour of what's going on in the borough. Thanks.
Just to close off this discussion in response to your question, there is a section in the report that talks about domestic violence cases, and it provides some numbers there in terms of the total number of cases happening in the borough. So there are some statistics in that report, but if there's ever any specific data stats that you want but you're afraid or you're worried will not be featured in a report, you can always come to me and Stella, and then we can look at getting those statistics in, because the statistics you're referring to are out there. It's just, you know, sometimes it can be quite difficult to pick them out, because I do know that there were statistics on the exact thing you're talking about. And just to add with domestic violence, because of recent legislation, I've got the exact act, that children are now also seen as victims of domestic violence as well, and not just for adults in that case. So it's very much linked to children, as you say. And with that, I know this portion of the agenda has taken quite a bit of time, but it is a very important issue. And so I wanted to make sure that members had the time to ask all of their questions and to leave nothing unsaid. And so no apologies really about the time it's taken, but we do not want to be here all night. And so I'd just like to give a massive thanks to Sarah and Halima for your time and for taking on all of our questions, some of which were quite challenging questions. You are doing quite important work as critical friends of the MSCP, and I wish you well in that work, and look forward to welcome you back to a future scrutiny meeting. And also special thanks to you, Halima, for demonstrating the power of having a youth voice at scrutiny. That's the sort of thing I want to see more of at CYP and other scrutiny panels as well. So thank you very much. And if you'd like to sign off at this point, please do, but you're also welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you'd like. I'll leave that decision in your hands. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll now move on to agenda item 5, which is the Child Healthy Weight program. And I'll hand over to Julia and Sandra. I hope I've got your name right. Oh, sorry. Please correct me. To introduce the report, and then we'll pose any questions that members have in the room and online.
Thank you very much, Chair. So yes, just to introduce myself, I'm Julia Groom. I'm a consultant in public health with Merton Council, and I'm here with my colleague Sanjana Gio, who is also part of the public health team. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present progress on the work around child healthy weight in the borough. What I wanted to do today was really set out some of the information, what the position is in Merton, particularly how this is very much a big health inequalities challenge in the borough, but also present progress to date and some of the work we've been doing and the future planned work, and would very much welcome your input around that. So perhaps if I just briefly go through some of the key themes in the report that you've had before we open up for questions. Childhood obesity is a really significant risk factor for poor physical and mental health, both in childhood, but also onward into adulthood. We know that the COVID pandemic has had a negative impact on child healthy weight and has resulted, we believe, in an increase in overweight and obesity among children. There's also a huge stigma associated with obesity and an impact on mental health and well-being. So just briefly looking at some of the data, we know from the data actually before the pandemic, and this is data that's measured through the National Child Measurement Programme, which our school nurses deliver. We know that 1 in 5 children in reception, aged 4 to 5, were overweight and obese in Merton. And this increases as the children get older and go into adulthood. So by the end of primary school in year 6, when children are 10 and 11, that overweight and obesity has increased to 1 in 3 children. And then by the time children reach adulthood in Merton, we know that 1 in 2 adults in the borough are overweight and obese. Those figures are similar to the figures in England, but we know, it's a very challenging position right across the country. So we also know that this isn't spread equally across the borough, and there are much higher rates of overweight and obesity in the east of the borough. And we also know that young people are not physically active enough. So we know that about half of our 5 to 16-year-olds are not physically active enough. They're not reaching what the chief medical officer has set as the right amount of activity for young people, which is 60 minutes a day, each day spread out over the week. So moving on, the impact of childhood obesity, as I've touched on, is really very much around physical health in childhood, but also into adulthood. And the consequences can also be difficult for mental health. And, this generally emerges sort of in mid-childhood and can go on into adulthood as well. There's also a huge economic cost. So overall, we know that the effects of obesity across society annually are 27 billion, and to the NHS, that's over 5 billion. So huge economic impact on the country as well. Just to touch on some of our health inequality challenges. So there is a strong association with deprivation and childhood obesity and overweight. So we know that overall in the borough, if we look at our 10 and 11-year-olds in year 6, we know just over 35% are overweight and obese. But if we look at the most deprived parts of the borough, particularly in the east, that rises to 43%. Compared to the west, which is 25. So you'll see on page 33, there is a chart that shows you how actually the gap between the east and the west of the borough has been increasing over recent years, which again, you know, in terms of our health inequalities is something that we are trying very hard to address, but it is challenging. And if you look at page 34 of your report, you will see a map showing the wards in the borough. The darker areas highlight where we have the highest levels of overweight and obesity, which again is challenging. We also know from the data that there are inequalities in terms of ethnicity. So we know from national data that Black children and Black and Asian children are more likely to be overweight and obese. And there is also a gender differential as well. We know that boys are more likely to be obese as well. As I mentioned, the COVID pandemic has had a significant impact. The move to online education, the lack of access to physical activity potentially, isolation among families. We know from the great work that the young inspectors did in terms of the young people's survey that lots of people were worried about their health and particularly their mental health during lockdown. We've also seen an increase in eating disorders and disordered eating among young people, which has increased since pre-pandemic levels. There's also a connection very clearly between the cost of living crisis and childhood obesity. So we know that food poverty is a driver of poor physical and mental health. We know that families, although you don't always associate food poverty with overweight, we know that families experiencing food poverty often rely on less nutritious food and cut back on fruit and vegetables. So that means hunger and obesity can often coexist. We also I wanted to highlight the link between the climate change emergency and unhealthy weight. So lots of the actions to tackle climate change can also have a positive impact on child healthy weight. So I wanted to move on just to talk about what activities are taking place locally. It's a very complex problem to address. There isn't a single solution. The evidence shows that in order to try and tackle the issues of promoting healthy weight, you need a comprehensive program that focuses on population-wide changes and looks at the food environment, the physical environment, looks at communities in the round and focuses where there is the greatest level of need. So we have been working on a child healthy weight action plan since 2015. You can see on page 36, there are 3 broad themes within that. So making child healthy weight everybody's business, supporting children, young people and families, and our healthy place, so Merton as a place. And perhaps I just wanted to highlight some of the actions that we've been taking under those 3 themes. So in terms of making child health everybody's business, we have been supporting our schools to become part of the London Healthy Schools programme. So we have 18 schools at bronze level, 9 at silver and 3 at gold. And we have our Merton School Sports Partnership working with schools to encourage as many to sign up as part of that programme. We've got 31 schools supporting the Active Daily Mile programme. We have organisations signed up to our Sugar Smart programme, raising awareness and trying to reduce sugar consumption. The new school meals contract includes a focus on more plant-based foods and has clear nutritional standards. And we're also rolling out at the moment a program of face-to-face online workshops for staff to feel confident to have conversations about healthy weight as part of their everyday work. Moving on to our second theme, which is about supporting children, young people and families. There is a strong focus at the moment on food poverty and food poverty action plan. We've been working with Sustainable Merton to support Merton's community fridge network to coordinate food distribution and food support for families. So a lot of work has been taking place on that and will continue. There's additional investment to come. So we'll be working very closely on that programme. We've also been, we have a local, a national Healthy Start voucher scheme, which is about vouchers for healthy food for families with young children. We're very keen to promote uptake of that. We know that at the moment, only 61% of families who are eligible are actually taking that. So we want to have a big push to try and reach those families that are missing out. We also have our community health provider, CLCH, who have a very strong focus on promoting breastfeeding and are at a level 3 of the UNICEF Baby Friendly programme. They're doing some particularly targeted works trying to support ethnic minority mothers who may be experiencing low mood and mental health issues and supporting their breastfeeding. We also have a Family Start programme, which is about providing that individual support to families and young people. And there is the borough-wide holiday activities and food programme that has been running throughout the holidays and will be running again over the Christmas holidays. And we are currently piloting a young people's social prescribing pilot, which is for young people who have either concerns about their weight or low-level emotional well-being needs. And that is being piloted within one of our primary care networks in the east of the borough, and is about providing a link worker who can have individual sessions with young people to support them and signpost them onto other services. I'll quickly move on to our last theme, which is around healthy place. So there are, as I've mentioned, there are links between the climate change action plan and the healthy weight action plan. For example, the council colleagues are working on the development of a cycling strategy, which I believe will be reported to council in the new year. That's about looking at our infrastructure for cycling, but also looking at cycle training opportunities. We also have been, they've been promoting water fountains, so there's access to free water across the borough. And we've implemented a similar policy around advertising to Transport for London, which aims to try and reduce the level of unhealthy advertising aimed at children. We have a super zone pilot, which is actually with Merton Abbey Primary School, which is looking at how we can promote cycling and walking and reduce car usage to the school. And we've put in a bid for an additional pilot, which we're kind of hoping we will hear from shortly. We're also doing some work around our healthy catering commitment with our neighbouring boroughs, and are very much looking at surveying of food providers in areas where we know there isn't as good access to healthy food and how we can address those issues. And you may be aware of the Green Social Prescribing pilot, which is called Walk and Talk, taking place in 5 parks every week across the borough, which is open to all ages. So I will pause there. We just have I have set out on page 38 and 39 of your report some of the things that we're aiming to do going forward, which focus on strengthening our work around food poverty, expanding our focus on breastfeeding, so we have a whole borough approach to promoting breastfeeding. Looking at a new piece of work around promoting physical and social activity, and also trying to improve and increase our communication around child healthy weight. So if I pause there, and I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I was about to say with how thorough you were going through that report, I'm not sure if the members will have any questions, but we do have quite a few questions. We'll start off with Councillor Hall, and then Councillor MacArthur, and then Councillor Kirby. Those will be the first three questions.
Hi, thanks very much for the report. It's very interesting reading. Can I just ask, you mentioned the vouchers for healthy food for families with young children. It's currently disseminated through Sustainable Merton and Children's Centres. Had you thought maybe about also helping through food banks? Because often families who are in food poverty need extra fruit and vegetables through there. So I'm just wondering if that's something that's been considered. Thank you.
Sorry, wrong one. Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to know how you evaluate the schemes that you use, because I noticed, I think you said one's been going for 5 years, and the ones that you're doing now through the schools, how do you evaluate which ones work and which ones aren't so successful? Because obviously the problem appears to be getting worse. And so it would be interesting to have some feedback on which schemes you think work better than others. Thank you.
Mine's a bit more than just one question, a couple of comments. Is that okay? Yeah. Well, first of all, we set up a junior park run in our area to get the kids coming, but the families that are coming are middle-class families, and the ones that we really want are not coming. And I would say on the walk and talk movement, ditto. It's a major problem, I think, how we get the kids that we really want out there. In terms of the social prescribing, I'm really glad to hear about that, because it's a link to the work that the Scrutiny panel did in 2019 when that was one of the recommendations. So good to hear that. In 3.2 in the report, it says 50 schools in Merton have registered for the Healthy Schools London. We're councillors and many of us are on governing bodies. I'd like to know which schools are not on it, so that we could actually make sure they are on it and doing something about it. And could we not insist that this issue is on the agenda of all school governing bodies? I mean, I think it's so important. And when you talk, I mean, I got on the scales and weighed 11 stones, and going on the intermediate fasting thing, I was shocked to find I was 11 stone, and I'm now doing something about it. But 1 in 2 adults, I mean, that is unbelievable. And I'm looking around the room wondering how many of us in here are in the 1 in 2. But, you know, it is shocking, absolutely shocking that so many people are overweight, particularly when you, so yeah. So I think we want to do something about it dramatically.
So we'll take those questions first, and then we'll take everyone else that had a hand up afterwards.
Thank you very much, Chen. Thank you for the questions. So on the healthy food vouchers, absolutely, we have printed a leaflet to promote the scheme, and that has gone out to food banks. We've also had publicity at all of the cost of living events that have been taking place across the borough. So we are doing our best to try and promote it as much as possible. It was a topic of discussion at the recent cost of living summit, how we can particularly reach young families with under 3s, and a particular issue was raised about, you know, we're promoting breastfeeding, but actually when you're breastfeeding, you also need to have an very healthy and nutritional diet. So how can we address those issues? But yeah, thank you, Councillor. We definitely promote it through food banks. If I address the second question, which was about evaluation, and I think one of the challenges is that tackling this issue has to be done at all levels. There needs to be a national approach, a regional approach, and a local approach. I don't think local areas can do it all on their own, although we'll try very hard. With our new schemes, we are building in an evaluation. So, for example, the social prescribing and the new green social prescribing programs, we are actually going to do an independent evaluation so we can see what impact they are having. With our other programs, I mean, we look at the national evidence and really look at, whether they are having an impact. I think it is challenging because, as you pointed out, the data is not going in the direction we would like, and we know that the COVID pandemic has had an impact. So I think it's a combination of looking at the national evidence and evaluation, and then where we are able to do our own independent evaluations of new programs. So thank you. And then the other question was around, I think, a point around how do we reach the right parts of the community where we know that there is the greatest challenge. Prior to the pandemic, we funded a piece of community-led research called the Great Weight Debate in Merton, which specifically took place in the east of the borough, which was very much about getting families and young people involved in talking about what are the challenges that face them. And some of the things that came out of that were very much around the affordability of activities and some of the positive things about kind of food and how food brought communities together. So, I think there is evidence locally that we can build on, and I think some of the findings that came out of the Young Inspectors residence survey as well. But I agree, it is a challenge. And then I think the final point was around healthy schools. I absolutely agree with you about the role of school governors. I did actually used to be a school governor in a school in Merton, and I got healthy schools on the agenda, so it can be done, and I would absolutely welcome that as a role for all school governors. Thank you.
Thank you for those answers. I will now turn to Councillor Charles, Councillor Fleck, and then Monsu. And I'll take an additional question from you, Una, as well, because I don't want you to be the only one left out and having asked the question.
Right, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that report. I just wanted to turn to page 34, which shows the wards and the actual level of obesity on them. Now, I actually live in, or very close to, the ward that's in the white. And I actually represent one of the wards that's the dark blue, which is Ravensbury. So I just wanted to talk about the difference between the two in terms of cycling, because from Rains Park, there's a dedicated cycle track called the B line. It's for pedestrians and cyclists only, going from Rains Park to New Malden. There's another one going from Rains Park to Wimbledon Town Centre. And there's another one going from just at the bottom there behind Wimbledon Chase, from Rains Park behind Merton Park. But you look at the ward I represent, which is Ravensbury, and it's bounded by Bishopsford Road, by St Helier Avenue, by Morden Road, and it's traversed by Wandle Road. And all of those roads have got very, very heavy traffic. There's lots of fumes, there's speeding cars, there's been fatalities. And, basically, there's no way kids can cycle there in that ward, because it's just far too dangerous and far too polluted as well. And there's no cycle tracks whatsoever there. So I think that's something perhaps I ought to take up with my ward colleague, Councillor Alan Brightis, who's the Cabinet Member for Transport. But I mean, that is an issue, really.
So actually, hopefully, sorry, I don't know why my mic's making such a squeaky noise. I think actually it's going to build on slightly from what Councillor Charles has just said. You talked about there's a difference between East and West in the borough, different ethnicities. what are you looking into? Have you looked into why that is a problem? Is it lack of access to healthy food? Is it lack of affordability of exercise, after school clubs and things like that? And then really quickly, how are you classifying obesity? Because I think we all know that BMI is not an accurate representation of obesity and could possibly explain why 1 in 2 adults may not appear obese, but are maybe being classified as such.
And Monsu, do you want to ask your question?
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Julia, for the very comprehensive report. I just need to know, in terms of obesity, what is the significant reason for obesity and what action Merton has so far been taken to reduce this obesity? Thank you.
And Una, your final question for this round.
Like everybody else who's spoken, I applaud the initiative and its aims. I note that there's some comment about the ease with which people get involved and the variability of that. So that prompts me to ask about the comprehensive nature or otherwise of practical food facilities within Merton schools, because when children have the opportunity to do practical work with food through design and technology or food and nutrition, and in particular when that can involve parents in coming in, for example, in after school activities, it really makes a difference when children make things themselves and are encouraged to taste and so on in a school environment. That really can be extremely powerful. And I have to plead ignorance and say I don't really know the extent to which this is available within Merton. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So if I just pick up those questions. So the first one was regarding cycling and cycling infrastructure. And as I mentioned earlier, that colleagues in our environmental and regeneration teams are developing a cycling strategy for the borough. So I think I might have to come back to you with further details on that. I think it absolutely is challenging to improve the cycling infrastructure at the moment, particularly in certain parts of the borough. So there is, as well as the infrastructure, an emphasis also on training, but as you say, that can be challenging. So I'm happy to come back to members with more information from my colleagues from E&R if that's okay. The second question was why is obesity higher in areas of deprivation? I think that was the question, and then also about the classification and use of BMI. So I think there has been a lot of research into why it's higher in areas of deprivation, and I think it is really multifaceted. So it's a combination of the environments that people are living in. So it may be due to lower access to green spaces. It may be due to living on a lower income. It may be due to having less access to affordable food. It may be about not feeling safe to go out at night in your environment. So there are a whole range of reasons. I mean, what it very, very clearly isn't, and we said this consistently, you know, people haven't fundamentally changed from previous years. So it's not about individuals. It's not about laziness. I mean, also challenges like if you're living in a housing, in a difficult housing situation or an overcrowded housing, your ability to cook, the affordability of cooking as well is also really challenging. So there's a whole host of reasons, and there has been quite a lot of research done into this. In terms of
sorry, apologies, Julia. Just before you move on to the next question, I just wanted to add to the answer you've just given, because what was interesting in the report is the first graph shows that from 2013-14 onwards, the difference between obesity or healthy lifestyles in the east of the borough and the west of the borough diverge, and the west becomes healthier, whilst obesity in the east keeps going up. And just based on the answer you've given, I'm just curious as to, you've done any research into what happened there. What was it that was going on in the west that meant that was becoming healthier, whilst the east continued on this steady negative trend of obesity? Because the changes in the west were actually quite dramatic. And so I was just curious about that, based on the answer you've just given.
We haven't looked at what has happened in the West specifically. As I said, when we did our sort of community-led research, we did focus on the east of the borough, because we wanted to hear from local people what they thought were some of the things we could do and the solutions. So we haven't looked at the West. So I can't give a specific answer around that, but I think if we look generally, I think if people are families are in secure housing with secure incomes, with access to safe green spaces, that it makes it easier for families. But as I said, we haven't done any specific research into the west of the borough. Is that okay? Shall I move on? So the other question was around BMI classifications. And I think at the moment, the National Child Measurement Programme does use the BMI as the main measure. And it does provide feedback to parents around their child's measurements. We know that for adults, for example, BMI is supplemented with a waist circumference, provides a more kind of accurate measure. But I think at the moment, BMI is the best population measure we have. I don't know if Sanjana, you want to come in with anything further on that.
Thanks, Julia. No, that's absolutely right. At the moment, that is what is being used just everywhere. In some programs, so we have the 98th percentile that we look at as well, just looking at some in terms of seeing patients and kind of looking at their gradual kind of increase in terms of monitoring side of it. But generally, if we are looking at NCMP, unfortunately, NCMP is the only measurement program for children and young people. That's why all our figures are reception and year 6, as you must have easily noticed. So other than that, we do not have any other data available for children and young people, unfortunately, at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjana. So I think the next question was, I think it was just to clarify, was the next question regarding why we have obesity in the borough? Is that the reason for obesity? I think I've touched on some of that in my previous answers. So it is really multifaceted. It is due to national policies. I mean, as well as our local policies that have an influence on obesity. People talk about something called the obesogenic environment, which is basically a kind of obesity promoting environment, which is, the increase in car usage, a whole range of factors. So I think it is quite complex, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why I've said we're trying to take a kind of multifaceted approach. We're trying to promote healthy weight in all the activity of the local authority, and our partners and the NHS to try and address it. The next question, I think, was about food and food within schools and cooking skills. I don't know if Elizabeth wants to come in on this one.
Thank you, Julia. Yes, to answer your question, Una, I couldn't tell you how many schools had got kitchens, for example, enabling children to be undertaking lessons in schools. But we do have schools with some wonderful facilities. I was visiting Cricket Green just a couple of weeks ago and seeing their wonderful kitchen there. And obviously Cricket Green in that part of the borough where we have the higher levels of obesity. I think I would say that the Healthy Schools programme, which 50 out of the 57 schools are engaged in, will want schools to be addressing matters of healthy eating within that.
Thank you very much for those answers. Did we have any last questions before we move on? Okay, so we'll go to Councillor Pearce first, and then Councillor Hayes and Councillor MacArthur, and then we'll round up this agenda item.
Thank you, Chair. I did my primary school in the early mid-50s, and I can see that from the way I was brought up, that it's not only what you eat, it's when you eat. Because loads of children, as I can see, you always went out with breakfast. Now there are loads of children arriving at school and they haven't had anything to eat. And when you see, say parents or minders or whatever, they're turning up at the school gate and they're giving sort of sweets to their children, and they have their main meal when it's too late, sort of 7, 8 at night, when you should have had your main meal at breakfast. Because as I was always told, that keeping fit is only 20% exercise. Might be all right for your physical health, but it doesn't help keep your weight down so much as the diet is poor or at the right time of day. Because you go to bed then after eating loads of salt and sugar laden food in the evenings, you don't get proper rest and you wake up even more tired in the morning than you were at the night before you went to bed. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Well, I have to say, I feel a little bit like Hannibal Lecter talking about madness. If you've seen the film, being somebody that's overweight, talking about being overweight. We can all be emeritus professors in nutrition. I tell you, there's one stat that sticks out like a sore thumb to me, and that's the stat the council provides, and it's on the website, and that is the profile of your own ward. The average household income, when it was last measured, which might be a little bit dated now, in Graveney is £35,000 per year for a household. And Graveney's got a high instance of obesity. I bet you, if you check that across the borough, in all the wards, there's a linkage between poverty or low pay and obesity. I think there's also, because it's not obviously, as you was said before, it's multifaceted, but it's the explosion of sugar in everything. And if you haven't seen the film, the Sugar film on Netflix, you should see it, because that tells you everything you need to know. And what we're battling against to some degree is habits. Take Dennis's point on board. You know, we had school milk when we went to school. But I think we're also battling against social trends, the increase in sugar in schools. And the other thing that occurs to me, I mean, is there any analysis of the food that's in schools in the what's the name machines, the dispensers? You know, that's a direct question. Do we still have dispensers of the sugar stuff in schools? But anyway, to go back to a point I wanted to make, I think there's a definite relationship between obesity and poverty. There's no question about it. And I think it's a good way of looking at it. It's not an accident. Say, for example, you look in the States, all the people who are on the telly are all pencil thin, and all working class in America, by and large, is a lot of obese people. But I think it's to me, the relationship in the borough can be measured by the level of wealth in particular wards. It's not an accident that when we're talking about east-west in our borough, what we're really saying is Wimbledon versus the Mitcham area. And the reason why the obesity is there is because of the lack of income for families, because they end up buying stuff in bulk, and that's fat, and it's poverty to me, in my opinion, in the borough. But I would just want a specific question: do we still have dispensers in schools of sugar drinks and crisps and stuff like?
Thank you. Now hand over to Julia to answer the question. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. I'm just coming back to the point again, and I'm sorry to harp on about it. It concerns me that we don't seem to have evaluation for projects that we're doing. So I was looking at the 22 things for 2022. It looks great, but I'd like to know, do you know if it's worked? Because I see that you're going to be doing 23 things to do in 2023. And I just think we've got all these great initiatives. Do we know if they work, or what works better, so that we could put more resource into that particular thing, the aspect that works? And I just find it concerning that we don't seem to have, and I realize it's not you, it could be a national thing of having a feedback on what is really working well and what isn't working so well. And sorry, a very minor point, but 2.2, it says it's an increase of 17%. It's actually not, it's gone up another 17%. It's actually an increase of 85% on that figure. That was just concerning me.
Thank you, councillors. So just to go back to the first question, which I think was about the impact of breakfast and the timing of food. Sanjana, did you want to pick that one up?
Thank you. I think that's a really good point, and not something that has normally been discussed about timing, and there's a lot of research around that. When food is consumed and the quality of food. So you were absolutely right. There's this element about children, not just about having breakfast and then going to school, but also what kind of breakfast they're having before they go to school. And I think it's to do a lot. There's a lot to do with the lifestyle that has been recently adopted as well, and what we are seeing in the television, for example. And it's quite multi-layered. I think you're right. It's about sending children to school with the right amount of and a right time of having some food that enables them to go and have the right impact of education and development, because when they go to school hungry, they are not receiving the quality of education, etc., that they would need to. And obviously there is an also interrelation with sugary diet and how it spikes their blood glucose level and how that affects the children. So I think you're right. There is it's the only bit that I would want to say is it's really difficult to monitor that, especially children who are going to school hungry, for example, or eating diet at different times, having tea later or something like that. But yeah, I think, Julia, if you can.
If I may just add to that, and many Merton schools have got breakfast clubs, which you'll be aware of, Councillor Pearce, and the importance of those breakfast clubs in providing reasonably priced and hopefully good quality breakfast, so that children are eating at an appropriate time before they come into school.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So just moving on to the next point, which I think there was an issue about the relationship between poverty and obesity, and I think that is very clear. There's a London plan called Every Child a Healthy Weight that sets out 10 ambitions for child healthy weight, and their first ambition is around ending child poverty, because the evidence is quite clear around that. I think you also asked a question, Councillor, about vending machines in schools, and I have to say I am not sure of the answer on that, and perhaps we can come back and find out and come back to you on that one. And then I think the final question was around evaluation. And I am, Councillor, very happy to take that away. I think what we've tried to do is make sure that the programmes that we put in place are based on evidence about what what works, but they haven't all been evaluated. I think the one you mentioned in terms of the Merton Can campaign, the 22 and 22, we haven't done a formal evaluation on that. We obviously that we had the pandemic that meant that program was slightly delayed, but I can certainly take that back to colleagues and we can come back and look at that. We are planning to do an action plan around our communications on child healthy weight. A lot of that will be about how we can amplify and reinforce the national campaigns, because there is a lot of national campaign material where they clearly have the resources to make sure they are fully sort of tested and produced in a way that is building on the best evidence around effective communications. But we can certainly take that away. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time and for taking all of our questions. And before we wrap up, just on that last point from Councillor MacArthur's question around evaluating the effectiveness of your programs, could I just get a show of hands from the members who would be interested in conducting some in-person visits to see some of these programs in action, because one thing I'm eager to do is to take our scrutiny work out into the field to see some of the things we're scrutinizing in action. And so just to gauge interest, so Stella and myself can work out logistics if there is interest. Who would want to visit some of these programs to see how they work on the ground? Okay, all right, well, it won't be a matter of visiting all the programs. We'll pick out a few. Don't worry, we won't go around all the programs, but I just wanted to gauge interest, and it will be based on people's calendars as well. So it won't be compulsory for everyone to attend, but I just wanted to gauge interest. So thank you very much, members. And as an action, we can look at some potential visits, assuming Julia's okay with that.
Yes, absolutely. That would be absolutely fine. There was just one point I don't think I kind of brought out perhaps as much as I could in my sort of discussion, which was also that the young inspectors have been very involved in this programme. We have a number of young inspectors that work specifically on public health programmes. They've been really, really active during the COVID pandemic about listening to the voices of young people, and then now going to be moving on to get involved in a much wider range of public health programmes. So, for example, one of our young inspectors has been very closely involved in the development of the social prescribing pilot. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that and say, yes, we would be happy to arrange visits if members want that.
Brilliant. And you're speaking my language by bringing in young inspectors. That's absolutely great. And thank you very much, Julia and Sanjana, for your time this evening and for thoroughly taking us through your report and answering all of our questions. If you want to make the commute back home now, that is absolutely fine. And we look forward to further updates on your efforts to address obesity in the borough in the meetings ahead. So thank you very much and have a good night. Okay, so we will move on to the departmental updates, but in an effort to try and claw back time, well, let's assume members have read the reports, and unless there's any particular areas you want to highlight, we can swiftly move on to questions. But I will hand over to Director Jane McSherry to say a bit about the report before we then hand over to questions.
So, Chair, I don't think I've got much to say by way of introduction, other than I just want to take the opportunity, because we've had our send revisit, we've had our draft letter, which we have 10 days to respond to, and then we're looking forward to sharing that with you. But it would be good to take the opportunity to say thank you to our partners who were part of that inspection. So particularly our health partners, our Parent Carer Forum, Kids First, parents and carers who contributed to that, and our young inspectors and our children, young people, and our schools, all of whom were part of that inspection. So I think it's worth just noting our thanks for their support in that process.
Fantastic. Thank you for that introduction, and we look forward to reading that report once the official findings are published. Now I'll open up to members with any questions regarding the departmental update, and if Cabinet Member Kenny wants to come in at any point as well, you're welcome to do so during this section. Any questions online? Okay, so there are no questions from members. I've got a couple of questions. My first question is around the contextual safeguarding updates. So since September, I've been receiving reports from head teachers who are concerned about incidents and gang-related activity in the borough, and also in surrounding boroughs as well. And I would just like a bit more information on how the council is addressing that issue to alleviate the concerns of some of the head teachers I'm talking to about this issue.
So I'll pick it up and then so we're working really closely with police colleagues and other partners to keep an eye on what's happening, to work together. And in terms of individual children, supporting them, but in terms of those weekly meetings, I know that Diraj was part of those this week. So if you want to update, and I think also Councillor Kenny's been out and would like to contribute too.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Chair. So as Jane's mentioned, we've got so within the Children's Social Care Department, we have the contextual safeguarding team that works very closely with police, with other partners, with our schools, with the youth justice system, youth justice service, the youth services, and they offer the individual work with children and young people. What that's enabling us to do is to alert the schools to when those issues happen, ensure that the schools are part of the plan, that are supporting some of those young people, intervening at the right times. What we have also we're also doing is we've had a series of meetings now with senior police officers, because we were very aware of the fact that there was growing concern, but there needed to be some communications back to the community and to the schools. So there's some work being done with the police around developing that communication back. We do have police officers linked to all our secondary schools, which I'm sure Elizabeth can speak a little bit more about. And they're doing some work with head teachers and giving some reassurances there. But we're taking that further into thinking about the communication conversation that need to happen with primary schools as well. So that's probably the update in relation to the conversations back with head teachers and to offer them some reassurances. I don't know, Elizabeth, if you wanted to say a little bit more about that.
I don't think there's much more detail to add. Schools officers are well embedded in Merton, and their work with our schools, and not just with the secondary schools, but they do reach out to our primary schools as well, is well respected and well valued.
I've just got a quick follow-up question on that before I then hand over to other members to ask questions.
Can I just add something as well? When
So sorry. Did you want to make your point first?
I went out with the youth group and the Youth Foundation team and went around with Keith Shipman and Kemi and some youth workers, and we walked through Morden Hall Park, where it is an area of problems with young people. They're very aware of it. They base the situation depending on what's going on, whether the police are involved or the youth workers are involved. So the youth workers don't go in where there might be law enforcement needed, but they're out and about and they're walking around. And when we were walking through the park into Phipsbridge Estate by the tram, one of them saw a youngster who they hadn't seen at one of the community units and went and spoke to them. And the child was able to say, I'm being bullied, I'm not going to school, I'm not coming to the club or anything like that. So there's not enough of them, and they are known, and the youngsters feel they're not intimidated by them because they're non-uniformed. So that your youngsters, I suppose I should say, do approach them. And we did then go on to see 3 Merton Bay youth centres where they are taught cooking. The youngsters have to cook as they come in. One was for primary age and 2 of them were for secondary, plus the Duke of Edinburgh's. So there are facilities to try and keep youngsters occupied and involved, but not nearly enough. And I wonder if I could, Chair, ask you if perhaps you'd consider inviting them to come and talk to the group, because it's very much something, it's still youth, but outside the school, but it is linked to schools as well. And it was lovely, the work I saw going on in Phipsbridge, Pollard's Hill, in Mitcham, and then the Duke of Edinburgh in Wimbledon. But it is something we need to look at and think what facilities. I know, Linda, at your North East Mitcham Community Centre, you have a lot going on for youngsters, but that's run by your group. But there perhaps aren't enough activities for youngsters to go along. But Linda, as you said, perhaps we don't get the ones we want to come. But it is an issue I think we need to think about and look at, and invite the youth team perhaps to give us a much clearer picture than I can possibly give. But they are on top of it and they are around the borough at those vulnerable times after school.
Thank you for that contribution. That is very useful to know. And my follow-up question was going to be around the notification of councillors when these activities are happening in the ward. I know there's obviously some operations that it's not appropriate for councillors to be involved in, but in terms of a general overview of flare-ups of this issue within a councillor's ward boundaries, I think it's useful for the councillors to be aware of that, because what happens is members of the community approach councillors and raise these issues, and if we haven't received some of these updates, we're not always able to respond in a full way. And so I guess it'll be good to know about at what stage is it appropriate to bring councillors in into what's happening so that they're also aware.
Could just come back on that. I think if you invite the youth team in, you could deal with that issue, but there are very few of them, and if they're out on the ground, to get back to communicate with everyone or think I've got to ring a councillor and let them know their priority is to ring that child, to contact that child, to get in touch with the parents and be a link, say, you know, your child's so-and-so, and we can talk these things through. So it is a very small team, very small team. But I think if you invite them here, and I agree, you want to know, but we don't know everything that goes on about anything really throughout. We know so much, but there are always details we don't know. But it is, I can accept what you're saying about communication, and perhaps if you speak with them, it might be something that can be addressed.
So did you have something to add? And then I'll open it up to members who have raised their hands.
Thank you, Chair. So just a couple of points on that note as well. So thank you, Councillor, for. So I think one of the challenges about making it ward-based is that it often isn't just one ward. So one of the conversations we've had with the police, and I didn't mention this earlier, is when we're looking at the communications back to the community and to the schools, it is very much going to be to also alert council members as well. So when we have that discussion with the police, or we're continuing that discussion at the moment, there are some challenges for the police at the moment around confidentiality and data protection. What they fed back to us this week in the meeting is they are going to have to go back and speak to their information governance to see what level of communication they're able to come back to communities and schools and councillors with.
That's very fair and understandable. And thank you for those. Oh, please go for it, Jane.
It's just to build on that. So part of the, so we're having these weekly meetings, and part of the reason we put them in place was around the communication and very clear, not only around schools and the community, but certainly for councillors. So absolutely raised the point you're making that councillors would like to have the information that that can be provided in a format so that you are aware of what's going on.
Thank you very much. And with that, any members in the room or online who have any questions? So we'll start off with Councillor Charles, and I saw Councillor Pearce's hand a while back, and Councillor MacArthur.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would like to ask a question. In Ravensbury, we do have a problem with gangs, and there's been a bit of drug dealing as well. But what I wanted to really ask, and apparently, yeah, it's quite young children. It's between the ages of 14 and 19, a lot of them. So what I really wanted to know is, what is the level of truancy in the borough's schools, and particularly in the ones near my ward of Ravensbury?
Councillor Pearce, your question.
I didn't know if you were going all the way down here. I would have asked this before, but about the school places strategy. Now, we all know that in certain circumstances, some schools are more popular than others. And if the school population is dropping in certain areas, especially in things like nursery, would it not, how can I phrase this? Certain schools are more popular than others, but if we start having an unreasonable difference in certain schools getting more children, wouldn't that damage the schools, because the money follows the child? The teams that really need the most help with teaching assistants and all these other things that might be withdrawn, wouldn't that be more damaging? And how can we counterbalance that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Two very quick ones. The EHCNE A process, which should be completed within 20 weeks, is currently at 77%. I wondered what you were doing to improve that figure. And the second one is to do with the expansion of special school provision. Now, I understand that at Whatley campus, there has been an issue with getting the staffing for a particular problem. And I wondered how you were going to deal with that if you were planning to expand the special school provision. Thank you.
I will start off with those questions, but maybe colleagues may wish to come in at various different points. So in terms of level of absence from schools, post-pandemic, absence levels have dropped significantly. and Merton schools in general are above national and local, as in London, averages, which is very pleasing. We don't break down absence or attendance by ward, but we obviously look at school by school, and where schools are needing some additional support, we're able to provide that through our educational welfare service. With regards to the school places strategy, Councillor Pearce, you bring up a very pertinent question, which is we have to look at place planning in conjunction with school budget issues. And so it's a very nuanced conversation that we have to have with schools where they are experiencing falling roles. And we have got to look at it strategically across areas. And behind it all, of course, as you're saying, is parental preference. So we have to have very careful conversations around this, but at the same time, because by reducing a form of entry, it can actually help a school financially, because for one, sort of in very blunt terms, if you have got 2 forms of entry but only 39 children on roll in Key Stage 1, where you can have to have those you can only have 30 children in a class, you've got to have 2 teachers, but the income, if you like, the income per pupil, the average weighted pupil unit that schools receive, they will only be receiving 39 as opposed to a maximum of 60. So all I can say is it's a very nuanced conversation, and we're doing that carefully with schools. In response to the question about the proportion of EHCNAs conducted within the 20 weeks timescales, that has significantly improved over the past 3 years. And 77% is well above the national average of 69%. It continues to move upwards. We have very clear tracking of this process. The undertaking an EHCNA requires input from partners across the special educational needs and disabilities system, and so working with partners to see, look at performance and understand where there are issues and address those issues together. In terms of expansion of special schools, I'm not sure entirely what problem you might be alluding to in terms of Whatley, but when we expand our schools, we work with the head teacher, with the governors, to ensure that there is provision which is appropriate, that there is staffing in place to be able to support children. I don't know if anybody wanted to come in with those.
I don't know that I'd have much to add, other than in terms of the staffing, obviously, again, we have to work with partners when we're opening additional special school places, and there are shortages of some particular therapists, for example. So yes, we have to plan quite carefully for that and keep an eye on how that is being provided, but we're working closely with health commissioners around that.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, then I just have one last one before we wrap up this agenda item. And apologies, Elizabeth, this is one for you, and it's not something that was in the report. And so I hope I'm not ambushing you with this question, because it is something that I'm sure you're well aware of. And that is the approach the department is taking to support schools which are currently in a budget deficit. First of all, it'd be good to get some contextual information as to how many schools are in that situation right now, and is there a clear policy on how the council is supporting those schools, and is that policy currently underway? And could you just give us more information on that, please?
Certainly. So when a school, a local authority maintained school, wants to set a deficit budget, we engage in conversation with them from the moment that they want to do that. And it's to have a conversation to understand what are the circumstances, what size of deficit are we looking at, how easy is this going to be to address. For schools where the deficit is potentially larger, the conversations are more substantial, and we will be supporting them to undertake a deficit recovery plan. because no school is allowed to set a deficit budget beyond year 3 in terms of their budget planning. So the support goes into schools to help them to conduct a review of their budget, and that is often going line by line through the budget, helping them help to share best practice, in other schools where we might have seen they have been looking at similar issues. And we do have Schools Forum have traditionally de-delegated a pot of resources of funding to support schools in challenging circumstances, and this includes schools which are facing deficit budgets in the context of falling roles. And so sometimes we are able to support schools with some financial support, but it is not a significant amount, but it is helping them to, for example, as they undertake their own measures to bring the deficit under control, to help them along the way. Because of course, the last thing, again, talking about nuanced conversations and wanting to be very careful, is, when schools are setting deficit budgets, it would be if a school were to choose to take significantly drastic action, that can really destabilize matters, and we don't want that to happen. That policy is well underway. It has been it's something we do with us. We've done traditionally with our schools for many years now. I couldn't tell you precisely at this moment in time how many are in deficit, because as you will be aware, the schools are under some significant strain at the moment with energy bills, just notwithstanding the 6-month support which has been promised from the government. There have also been pay rises for teachers and teaching assistants, which these are challenges for schools to face at the moment.
Yes. So yeah, I completely understand the situation schools are in financially. It is quite difficult. A follow-up to that, to what you've just said. With the schools that you're currently in conversation with regarding their budget deficit, are they fully aware of the full plan and strategy that the council is following in order to support them with their budget deficit? Because in full disclosure, I'm getting some conflicting messages from some schools. And also, Councillor Flack had a follow-up question as well on that as well. Before I hand back to you to answer that question, and also to the cabinet member for her contributions as well.
Thanks. Obviously, you acknowledged. There we go. Yeah, there we go. So obviously acknowledge that the additional problems the schools are facing this year, more so than sort of ever before. I understand you're working with them to go through their budget. Obviously, at some point that's going to fall short. There just isn't enough money in schools. Is there any sort of support that the council is going to do beyond sort of support with budgets, writing the budgets, or anything that the council can do to help those schools in that situation?
So I just think we need to be clear. Schools are funded through the dedicated schools grant. So the pot that Elizabeth was talking about, that's agreed by schools as a pot that comes from that dedicated schools grant. So the expectation is not that the council funds schools from general fund, so it is from that dedicated schools grant. So I think it is about what we're doing to raise the issue with the government, and certainly in terms of all of our conversations with the DfE. And I've been in a London-wide meeting today where we're absolutely raising those issues with the DfE in terms of the situation schools find themselves in. And I think that's the route that we would take. I think in terms of, so I'm not sure whether your question is about, are they aware that they will have these meetings or have these conversations if they set a deficit, because hopefully any school that's setting a deficit would know that because they'd be in those conversations, or whether it's about what other support.
My question is more around whether they're aware of what the deficit recovery, what that plan looks like all the steps they need to go through in order to get to a resolution. That was more my question. I'm sure they're aware they've got to deal with their budget deficit.
So I think just coming back again, I will come to your point, Chair, in a moment. I think what I'm about to say in terms of a further response to your question, Councillor Flack, may help us here. So one of the things that we want to do, and we are doing, is trying to establish how schools can share best practice. Head teachers come to being head teachers through teaching. They don't come through budget management. And one of the things that we want to do is to be able to support new head teachers in particular, to be able to develop those skills. And as I said, to share those best practice. And we've got a forum of school business managers, for example, again, and the opportunity for that best practice to be shared. A school's deficit recovery plan belongs to the school. And each deficit recovery plan will look different. And that is because of the unique situation that each school will find themselves in. And so what we would be doing, Chair, in terms of helping to understand, a school to come to their own plan, because it has to be their own plan, is to talk about what we've seen happening in other schools, is to make recommendations, is to talk about the parameters that the school needs to work within, and generally offering advice in that sort of way. But to, for a school to be able to understand the plan, a school needs to devise that plan to all intents and purposes themselves.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that the leader of Merton Council, Councillor Ross Garrett, has written to the Secretary of State demanding more funding for schools, particularly in the current climate. And I've also written a letter to chairs of governors with his letter to let them know what he's doing. So letting head teachers or the chairs of governors inform the schools what we are trying to do. But Merton has been quite forward thinking with spending best part of 2 million installing solar panels on our schools. I think it's 29 primaries to help reduce bills. It doesn't work so well at this time of year, but it does during the summer months reduce their bills, and very other energy efficient strategies. So there has been work going on, and we just hope that the Secretary of State will listen to Merton's plea, because that's where the money comes from, central government, and we've got to have more, and especially in the current situation.
Thank you for all those answers, and I certainly understand the difficult financial situation that schools are in, and they definitely need more funding from central government, for sure. And there might have been a bit of confusion as to what my question was, but through your various responses, I've got an answer to my question. It was more around the process to supporting them to develop their deficit recovery plan, and whether both steps that will be the same for every school, even as the plan is specific to that school. So with that, we will move on from this agenda item. You promise it's a quick question? Okay, go for it, Councillor Hayes.
Recovery timeline for any school.
So all schools have to come back in line within 3 years. That is what government regulations would say, and some would come in much faster than that.
No problem. So we'll wrap up that agenda item. Thank you very much for your responses and for taking an unexpected question as well. And also thanks for including in our reports the school places planning strategy, which was very useful reading, considering that that's an issue many members are concerned about. And regarding the contextual safeguarding conversation, Elizabeth and myself will be arranging a follow-up meeting with the police on that to get a brief on that. With that, we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is the performance monitoring report. And with that, I will hand over to Maisie for a quick introduction before we jump to questions.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so it's a regular performance report that members receive, and it provides our key performance indicators and our current performance against it. So this is performance up to September 2022. You have a report there which provides some commentary on the all of the red and amber VAG-rated KPIs. And I suppose I'll just bring to the attention of members that we've corrected the incorrect VAG ratings that I reported at the last panel, which is 17 and 18. And there is some further commentary around the performance of those two, along with all of the other red and ambers in the exceptions report. And we're also we do have a couple of performance indicators which you may have noticed. We have the targets under review, so that's the access to children's centre services and a number of foster carers recruited. This is purely just because they're cumulative performance indicators, and we just need to ensure that the targets are reflective of that cumulative nature of the performance indicator. So we'll bring a further update to the report next time. But that's it from me, Chair, if there's any questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'll now open it up to questions. We've got a question from Councillor Pearce. Any other questions? Okay, Councillor Pearce.
It's quite a broad brush one. I've noticed on all of these indicators that there are several on red that have no relevant benchmarkings. Why is that? Is that a conscious thing, or is that just that they don't do it?
Did you catch that question, Maisie?
Yes, I did. I was just checking there weren't any other questions. Thank you. So I think for where there's no relevant benchmarking available, that is typically, a lot of our benchmarking is done via DfE statistics, national statistics, and for some of these, we wouldn't necessarily have the corresponding information. I would have to sort of look into it to see if there's any alternative benchmarking that can be provided there, but that would be why for a lot of them we wouldn't have that benchmarking information. But the VAG ratings are of course based on the target measures, and the target measures are based on where we can benchmark and where we can look at what the sort of national guidelines say, what best practice says around what we should be aiming for targets. I hope that's helpful. I don't know if any of my colleagues wanted to add anything to that.
I'd probably just say, so it's around often where there isn't a London benchmark. So we look at whether there's national benchmark and whether there's a London benchmark. So sometimes there will be one and not the other. Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Maisie, for your time and for hanging on the call till the very end for a short section. We appreciate your time, of course. Well, the second to last agenda item, we will be wrapping up the evening very soon, is the work programme. And for this, I will hand over to councillors Kirby, Hall and MacArthur to give the update on their task group looking at child self-harm.
button. Okay. Jill, Samantha and I met on a couple of occasions. We put together terms of reference, which I've given to Stella today. So our first meeting was around terms of reference and also to look at the areas of research that we want to focus on. The second meeting was with Dr. Nihara Kraus of Chief Executive STEM4, which Jill very kindly organised for us. STEM4 has an array of amazing apps to support young people and their families through their difficulties. And on the 17th of November, I've arranged for Dr. Nihara to attend Merton Secondary Head meeting to talk about her programme. So very grateful to the heads for agreeing to that. I know Dr. Hara is very pleased about that. And at that meeting, I will also be asking how they're dealing with these issues, what obstacles they're up against, and hear what ideas they have as a community that we could deal with these issues more effectively. And it'd be good to get some case studies. I'm obviously not going to ask them to respond to all of that at the meeting, but they could respond to that in emails afterwards. But what I would also like to say is that Natasha Irons, who was chair of this Children and Young People Scrutiny panel, did in 2019 a report, which was the group's review of children's mental health in Merton, and it's very relevant really to what we're looking at here. So I think we want to be building on that and actually look at the recommendations that were made in that to find out whether they have actually been adopted and are in use. So I think, yeah, so I'd like to just ask Jill and Samantha if there's anything that they'd like to add to that.
No, I think you've covered it, Linda. As I say, STEM4 do some fantastic work in local schools on a range of mental health issues, but eating disorders is one of the key ones. They also cover anxiety and depression and self-harm. But I think, yeah, we need to keep working on it. To be honest, we didn't have an awful lot of time since the last meeting. You know, we've only had, what, 5 weeks, and this is going to take a little while. But yeah, we're working on it and working well together. So thank you.
Thank you. There's nothing to add really to what Linda and Jill have said. It's a very big project, and I think there's a lot of work to do. But hopefully at the end we'll be able to achieve something and bring it back to.
Thank you very much for that update. It sounds like it's
And
sure.
that is just listening to one of the things I was listening to the scrutineers and the talk about the young inspectors, and you're kind of feeling they're right there, really, aren't they, to be asking some of these questions, but it's not the same remit. So I'm just wondering how we could tailor perhaps engagement with young people through young inspectors. Is that likely to be possible?
Councillor, I think probably let's talk outside the meeting and work out what the capacity is of the team at the moment, because I'm sure they would be, it's the sort of thing they would love to look at. But let us talk. Thank you.
Yes, that's definitely something to follow up, and you have my support with that. And I was just saying, thank you for all the work you've put into this task group already, especially independently. It sounds like it's moving along very nicely. And so I really appreciate the time you're investing in this important issue. And I look forward to further updates. If you just let Stella and myself know when you've got more updates for the group, I can look at the agenda and fitting you in, because we're all following this really closely. And if there are any activities you'd like us to come along to as well, please do feel that you can invite us along. I would really want to go. Okay, with that, we've come to the last agenda item. Very quick. It's just any other business agenda item. I saw Stella sweating a bit. Councillor MacArthur and myself attended a local government association presentation yesterday on youth services, and where local authorities had the opportunity to share their youth models and the benefits and limitations of each model, which we found very useful, although it's still fresh in our minds. And so we haven't quite digested it all and really reflected on it fully. But what we can do is we can share the presentation with you also. You have access to that same information as well, because it is very useful reading. And the last thing I wanted to say this evening, and I hope he does not mind me bringing this up, Councillor Pearce has made the decision to step down from the Children and Young People Scrutiny panel. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to just say a massive thank you on behalf of all of us for the years that you've dedicated to this committee, and for your insight and contributions for the past few committees that I've chaired. I really value your input, and it'll be missed dearly. But I wish you well, and thank you again for everything you've contributed to this committee. And thank you everyone else for your time and your contributions, and apologies that this has gone on much longer than I planned for these committees. But I hope you will get home safely, and